All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Heather McMeekin. I'm the president of the Democratic Women of McDonough County, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this very special Juneteenth edition of this event for us. I want to give a content warning at this time. Please be advised that you may find the information that we present today to be disturbing and distressing. We ask that you attend to your self-care and any needs you might have. And if you find yourself feeling overwhelmed, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. We have people ready to assist you. And please note that some of the things that you're going to hear today are very difficult and can be re-traumatizing, especially for people of color. We will be putting up a lot of the affidavits, a lot of the paperwork and such that you will reference today up on our website, and that'll be done over this next week. And also this press conference came about because Monday night we attempted to go to the city council and help victims of police violence here address the city council. Unfortunately, those victims were silenced, as were the members of our org. The public comments that we had submitted on time, which were short and should be well below the 3-minute mark, were completely ignored by Mayor Michael Inman and City Administrator Scott Coker. And one of the people who you'll hear from today had then raised her hand and had left it up quite a while. They never called on her to hear what she wanted to say. And she was actually asking for help from a police officer who had harassed her at her home the previous weekend. This is a huge problem. If they will not listen to the voices of those speaking, we must find another way for us to get the word out. So that's what we're here for today. At this time, I'll let you know that we did file an Open Meetings Act complaint against the City of Macomb, Mayor Michael Inman, for the various violations and silencing tactics and disruption that happened at the Macomb City Council. And if you were to look at the story written on that in the newspaper, you would not know certain things that had happened. You might not know that when Dr. Martin Abraham from WIU attempted to call on our city leaders to step up and become anti-racist and begin working on these problems here, he was disrupted. The city leadership decided to, for whatever reason, allow racist disruption to occur. And there was no mention of it in the article. There was racist language, videos, text, sounds, and they didn't mute any of them, but they did mute all of our members of our Racial Justice Coalition who had intended to speak, and they did silence victims of police violence. So we have real questions about why they were able to competently, mute us and do nothing to prevent Dr. Martin Abraham from being mistreated that way. To his credit, he did very well, and we stand behind him and thank him for raising his voice. We do have a lot of questions, and those questions now will go through the Illinois Attorney General's office. At this time, I'm going to introduce Dr. Essie Rutledge, Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Western Illinois University, and she's going to speak to us about her experiences in this community. Dr. Rutledge, are you there?
Yes, I am.
The floor is yours.
Well, hello, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm here to just give a kind of summary of experiences I've had since being in this community. You know, so often when we speak of such things as we have come a long way, and that is often taken to mean that we have made a lot of progress. Well, that is not completely true. We are still in times of much racial and social injustice, and without leaders in this community really calling out behavior that is racist, that it represents injustice. But I can tell you, just as all over these United States. West of Macomb and McDonald County have racism too, because the racism may not all be the same. It is still racism, and it tends to affect people who are going through their daily lives trying to have recognition of the fact that they should have equality just as white people. And so this can be disturbing for some people to know that they are not receiving the kind of equal justice that white people are receiving. And this doesn't give many black people, most of us, a feeling that things are changing. So even though when we say a lot of progress has been made, it is not progress. Some changes have taken place, but we are not too far from where we were before the Civil Rights Movement. Now, there have been some pivotal points in this history, but they have not been sufficient to really eradicate the kind of injustice that Black Americans, as well as other people of color, will face in this community. We still, as we rise from our night's rest, if we look in the mirror, it becomes a question of what will I face today? What will be the challenges? White people don't have to do that because they have privilege. But those of us who do not have that privilege encounter these kind of experiences. And it needs to be known that Black people, nor any people of other races, feel that in order for us to get racial justice, equal justice, that we want your privileges taken away. We're not asking for that. But we are asking for to have equal justice, because we are the ones that are constantly confronted with all kind of racial victimization. When I came to this community in 1976, came as chair of the African American Studies Department at Western. And it wasn't a week before I understood the kind of racism that even existed on campus. When I came here, students were not being recruited from the inner city, Black students. They were not being recruited. There was this notion that to bring Black students to Western was degrading, that it tended to bring down our standards. And that wasn't said directly, but they would speak of the times that the educational standards were eroded. And they would say, around 73, everybody knew what that meant. That was the time when African Americans began to be recruited. Very few, but they were recruited from the suburbs of Chicago, not in a city. And the word on campus was often that Black people, African American studies, that African American studies was a department for Black people. not whites. That was a black program. And the academic advisors would question students about wanting to major in African American studies. And there were very few faculty at Western when I came. In fact, and I say this not as anything to really rejoice about, I say this to point out how pathetic this was, that when I came here, I was the only black female who was a professor, the only one that had ever been a professor, the only black female that had ever been chair of a department, the first black female to ever get promoted to full professor. Now, I think that speaks many, many words in reference to where the university was. And when the university went through the first changes in regard to restructuring the university with regard to departments and regard to other areas, administrative areas, they decided that they would now eliminate the Department of African American Studies. And it has gone downhill ever since. That department started off developed with good faculty. We attracted students. We had good programs going on. And because at that time, we didn't have the people who were the professors in the department, and we had two that were not tenured and two that were tenured. The two that were not tenured, they were dismissed. And so it has gone through the cycles from department to program, from program to department. But I must say, I was very happy to hear that Dr. Abraham is considering bringing the program back. There are no black people who were in the African American department nor the program. Are there anymore? You don't have anybody there. And so those are things that, and other things went on in the community, or in the university community. And it is also, I think, very important to point out, you see, at one time, after we elected President Obama, everybody started talking about, things have changed. We're moving on. But when you really, if you traced and followed the pattern of behavior that came from his being president, you know that his being president did not result in an extraordinary equal justice. People said all kind of racist, negative things. People would march, presenting various posters and what have with caricatures that were really offensive and racist. And so, and now we are at one of the, I think, worst times other than before the, I'm sorry, even before, other than before we really ended up having the passage of this civil rights movement, and we had the some things opening up that gave us the impression that maybe we were moving forward. But with all of the recent murders that have taken place in this country and other violent attacks that have been made not only by police, but by citizens. I want you to know that there are people have been threatened in regard to being run over by cars. I had almost a similar thing to happen to me at Walmart. And so there are issues that still exist that are frightening to people of color and lead them to believe that they are not safe. And these things are continuing. And sometimes there tends to be this view that comes from the citizens that Macomb is not like other places. We don't have this racism in Macomb. Well, that is far from being correct, because we do have them. Because we haven't had an African American or another person of color murdered by police, that doesn't mean that everything is well and good in this community. People are having negative experience, racist experiences all the time. And they are with employment, they are with their treatment in places where they go to shop. All of these are things that continue. And therefore, we cannot or should not be comfortable thinking that just because we haven't had the most atrocious example of racism in the country, that Macomb and the county are exempt, and it's an all right place to be, because it is not. But this kind of movement that has been taking place among the damn women's group is something that gives some gleam of hope. But until we have the leadership of this community, the government, and other people who are leaders of different organizations stand up and speak out against this racism, it's not going to stop. And so, and Black people are sick and tired of being sick and tired of white people telling us about they understand. We understand, we know, we empathize. And we need that, but we have had enough understanding without action. It is time for action. And one of the things I've seen with the recent rallies, protests, that they have, that these rallies, protests have been diverse. I have seen quite a few of the rallies where in some cases, in some places, there were more white people there than Black people, because more white people in the community. And if we are going to change this, we've got to be supportive and stand up against the racism in all forms, because it is systemic. Therefore, it is endemic. It is ingrained in the very core of our country. And unless we are doing something to eliminate it, we really don't need to be talking about we are making progress. Thank you for listening.
Thank you,
Hello?
Dr. Hi, thank you, Dr. Rutledge, for that. And at this time, the Democratic Women of McDonough County support Dr. Abraham's request to reestablish African American Studies Department at WIU. And we also call on the WIU Foundation to begin establishment of an endowment so that they can have an endowed chair that will persist beyond rough economic times. Our next presenter is Mimi Carr, and she's going to read some tweets from the internet from some of our students. Go ahead, Mimi.
Thank you. So the following statements were found on Twitter under the hashtag #BlackAtWIU. These are firsthand accounts of the racism our Black students face. Starting with the first one. Being Black at WIU is trying to schedule an event for your organization and the staff helping you, blatantly referencing you as colored. My freshman year, the day of Trump's inauguration, my friend and I were walking by Sherman Hall, and a Caucasian woman yelled out from her car, "Trump is president, you," racial slur. A day I'll never forget. We later found out she was on the cheer team and got kicked off. Black at WIU is having white professors just decide to pronounce your name wrong because they say it's too hard or they don't want to remember. Black at WIU is walking to catch the bus back to the dorms after leaving the movie theater, and a pickup truck with some Confederate flags pulls up and starts throwing beer bottles and yelling, "Get out of town," racial slur. A faculty member continually mistakes all the Black student workers as the same person because we look alike, and now makes us wear name tags because it makes it easier to tell us apart. Black at WIU. Years ago, an off-duty cop drove past our house and thought he saw a weapon, which was actually a phone, and called for backup. They surrounded our house, handcuffed, and held everyone at gunpoint in the cold until they tore the house apart, searching for a gun that was never there. One time, I was walking back to Grote from Olson, and I heard a really loud car behind me. I turned around to see there was a white man driving real slow behind me. I slowed down so that he could go past me, and when he finally did, I saw a huge Confederate flag in the back of his window. I was actually a little too scared to run. This man wasn't a student or faculty, but yet was allowed to circle the campus twice. These tweets are just a few stories out of dozens. Our Black students deserve better. There is no excuse for Macomb City leadership to have failed to address these problems students have been documenting for years. And thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mimi. And those are viewable up on Twitter with the hashtag #BlackAtWIU. Next, we have resident 1 who's going to speak about her experiences here. Go ahead.
I come from a mixed household. My mother told me of the first instance that I had with racism. At the age of 4, an older white woman put a collar on me and escorted me home. She told my mother, "Make sure to keep your animal on a leash." When I got older, we consistently had conversations about what to do in public. My older sister was fair-skinned and had strawberry blonde hair. I was dark brown with thick black hair. I was told to always stay with my older sister, and she was instructed to protect me. We are 6 years apart. Imagine being 12 years old and you have to possibly protect someone half your age only because of the color of her skin. People would constantly argue with us on whether or not she was actually my sister. That was when I first learned the term stepsister. To me, she was always just my big sister. When I was 8 years old, we went swimming at Glenwood. I wanted to do everything my sister did, so I was sunbathing with her and her friends. I started to feel hot, so I asked the lifeguard for some sunscreen and was told, "You're Black, you don't need sunscreen." Not knowing any better, I went back to lay out and later got my first sunburn ever where my nose turned very light pink. As I got older, the neighborhood I lived in became a constant battle. A little boy would yell the N-word out his window whenever people of color would walk by his apartment and his parents didn't care. An adult woman took photos of my friends and I, and she put them online and claimed we were in a gang and dangerous. The police and the head of the housing at the time did nothing about this. This same woman tried to fight me. An adult woman tried to fight a teen. When the police arrived, I got in trouble. Not her, but I did, and was told I was not allowed to walk past her apartment. But the problem is, our vehicle and bus stop, the only way to get there was to go past her apartment. So we had to park on the complete opposite side of the housing that we lived on, just so we could comply with what they wanted. At one point, one of my friends was being arrested as we sat at the playground. The head of housing looked at me and said, "This is going to be you one day." An officer attempted to arrest me, stating that I was a leader of a gang because I had so many friends. Thankfully, my dad was there, and I was able to go home. The same officer later tried to arrest me again for impersonating a dead person because I was carrying my deceased mother's ID with me. Thankfully, an officer that knew me and my family was there and told him to release me from handcuffs because my mother had recently passed. During high school years, as I could drive, I noticed how open people in the community were with their hate, from people yelling the N-word at me as I went by, and since I was my only sister's person to take her shopping for clothes, we were followed in the store. At school, students with loud trucks and noises could make as much noise as they wanted to, leaving the grounds, but those of us of color were pulled over because of our loud music and bass. This trend continued on into my adult years. I watched a coworker who was harassed by a white man that continually reported her for loud music from her car. Even though multiple police officers saw in her vehicle, she had no radio system and there were just wires hanging out. She still received a ticket and had to go to court to fight for the point of not even having anything. And it was my understanding that if you made false claims, you were the one to get in trouble, not the person you were falsely claiming. As an adult, I've experienced racism in workplaces and in the community, being told that my natural hair looked like it wasn't done. I tried out for the Colgate Singing Challenge, made it all the way to the end, and didn't pass because I was told I wasn't marketable. I was the only person of color. Everyone else was either blonde, brunette, wearing boots, or some sort of flannel. I remember one of the judges was extremely upset and came back into hangovers yelling how ridiculous it was that the only reason I couldn't go forward was because of the color of my skin. I had 2 white men follow me in their vehicle after leaving the gym, yelling racial slurs at me, and the only response I got from the police department was that the parent didn't even know that the kids had taken off with the vehicle and they were sorry. At a local bar, an employee of the bar would constantly make racist comments to me. He called me Aunt Jemima or would talk to me in an old-time slavery manner. I knew that the owners did not have the same mindset, so I refused to come in whenever he was working on the floor or was there in his free time. Recently, a known officer that is not a fan of people color living in his neighborhood borrowed a vehicle to sit in front of my home, off duty, just to watch it. Why? Because I had a family day and my kids were outside playing. All of the other neighbors assured me that we were not loud. I was informed to be careful because this man has chased not only out of his neighborhood, but completely out of Macomb. He has taunted dogs so that he can have them taken. He has broken into people's homes, and what scares me the most is that he's allowed to walk around in civilian clothes and use his weapon and his badge as a way to intimidate the neighborhood. I love where I am. I have amazing neighbors, and my home will continue to be a safe space for me and all of my kids. I hope MPD will do as they say and ensure that not only I am safe in my neighborhood, but that the sweet people that live around me that have to tiptoe right now can also be safe. And if you are listening, officer, I am speaking for myself and nobody else's point of view. Thank you.
And at this time, the Democratic Women of McDonough County call for Officer Ken Nevar to be investigated for these allegations and to be pulled off the street. And for those who keep saying that Black people who have problems should just go in and speak to our city leadership, it is unfair and unethical to ask marginalized community members to reach out to privileged white people to beg for protection from our police. And if we want to hear a lot more of these stories and be able to actually have people attach their face and name to it, we need to ensure that their bullies are disarmed. So at this point, we will reiterate that for all of the problems with the police department, once again, we call for Chief Barker to step down. Next, we're going to hear from resident number 2.
Hello, everyone. I am going to be sharing a couple of stories, things that I've seen as a white woman in Macomb. The first story is my first time ever really having an encounter with police. It was my first time seeing firsthand racism from police. In 2014, it was between 12 and 1 a.m. I had just gotten home from work and I was headed to my boyfriend's house. It was about a 20-minute walk. My boyfriend was on house restrictions and could not leave his yard, so he would wait for me in front of his house and stay on the phone with me as I made the walk many nights. This night was the last night that we did that. As I approached the house, a canine. I'm sorry. A canine unit cop car pulled up.
Take your time. Go ahead and take a breath. Okay, you're safe. Let's let you have a moment here, and let's talk about what this does. If I, as a white person, had to deal with this stuff all the time, how would I feel living in this community? These stories are really important to be told. So, I'm glad that we're able to do that. Do you want to take a break and we can circle back around?
No, I'm fine now. I think I can finish.
Okay.
As I approached the house, a canine unit cop car pulled up. He claimed that people in the neighborhood were calling in and reporting a suspicious male walking around the area. And he met the description, so they said. He explained that it couldn't have been him because he had an ankle monitor on and couldn't go further than where he was. They still asked for our IDs. I gave them mine. He didn't have his, but he asked if he could walk inside and get it. They said no. They asked for his name. They ran his name. They said that nobody came back with that name and that they were going to arrest him for falsifying his identity. They put him in handcuffs then, and they laid him on the road. I asked if I could go in and get his ID. I was told no. He asked if he could call his mom to bring his ID out, and they said no. And then at that point, for over an hour, they screamed at him, calling him a mama's boy, calling him a little boy. They threatened to put him in the back of the cop car with the canine dog, and they were going to let the dog rip him to shreds. Eventually, another officer pulled up, and they told me that I could go in and get the ID, but only if they let the officers come in the house with me, as a way for them to get into the house and see what was going on inside the house. To stop him from getting arrested, we allowed them to come in the house with me while I went to get his ID, and his brother met me at the stairs with his ID, and then they started questioning him and said that maybe he was the one that met the description. And for several hours that night, they just continued on telling them that they were mama's boys and calling them little boys and threatening to arrest both of them. They threatened to arrest his brother because he was a minor and he had shoes on, so that meant that he must have been out past curfew. And that was my first experience with seeing racism firsthand to somebody that I loved. The second incident was the most recent. I have 2 mixed kids, and my son went into Hy-Vee gas station to buy a Faygo pop. And he came out, and we left. And then I received a message on Facebook that I needed to call the Hy-Vee gas station. And they said that they were positive that my son had stolen empty gift cards because he was looking at them and then did not buy one. I had to then ask my son if he stole anything. Knowing that he didn't, the only reason he was questioned was because he is Black. And that is something that is a privilege. I can go in the store and I can look at things and I can walk out of the store without any repercussions. But my son, who is only 11, can't even go in the store and glance at a gift card without being accused of stealing. He has become so scared of the police that several months ago, he was having a very emotional day. He was struggling with his mental health. I had questioned on whether or not I should call for help. Eventually, he calmed down and we got him to go to bed. And he saw police lights outside. They were there for my neighbor. And he started crying and asking me if they were there to kill him.
Take a breath. Take your time. This time is for you. In this moment, your son is safe, and so are you. And we are here listening, here for you. Do you need to get a drink of water?
No.
Okay. You're doing very well. I know it's upsetting.
Yeah. And that continued on for the rest of the night until the police left, him screaming and crying and thinking that the police were there to kill him. And those are just a few of the experiences that I've seen. I'm there, but I'm not the one that's facing the prejudices. I'm not facing the racism, and I can't even fathom what people of color must face every day, because I am sure that those are experiences that many people have felt in this community. Thank you for letting me share those.
Thank you so much. And at this time, we reiterate our call for Chief Barker to step down, for the Macomb Police Department to be investigated, and for Mayor Michael Inman for his refusal to even hear these complaints, which should have been heard at the City Council meeting, if not for their disruption and then refusal to even consider them or acknowledge these residents who wanted to speak. We reiterate our call for Mayor Inman to step down or be removed. Next, our team who is working on Juneteenth is going to be speaking about their event later today. So would resident one like to begin with that? Give me a chance to unmute.
There is going to be the Black Lives Matter group that's on Facebook, which is separate from this. They had planned to have an event on the square where they were going to have a protest, and they also are going to be grilling hot dogs, and they will have somebody there where they can assist you with registering to vote, helping you complete your census, and register if you would like to register for the McDonough County chapter of the NAACP. They will have somebody up there to help with that as well.
Thank you. Now, next we have Maya, who's going to read her op-ed, Black Lives Matter, Call for Sustainable Transformation in Our Communities.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to start out with thanking you all for having me here and giving me a platform to speak. I also wanted to thank everyone else for having the courage to speak out even when we're under the threat of violence. So thank you all for everyone for being here. So today, as was mentioned, we are having the Juneteenth celebration and the Black Lives Matter protest at Chandler Park from 3 to 6 p.m. So since this is a Black Lives Matter protest, I believe it's really important to stay true to the Black Lives Matter Global Network message. The Black Lives Matter Global Network was originally founded after the murder of Trayvon Martin, when he was killed by a white vigilante who believed that he was suspicious simply because the color of his skin. So since then, the Black Lives Matter Foundation has turned into a global network, and they're still making calls for change. And I believe it's really important to amplify the Black Lives Matter message. So I want to go ahead and amplify their work by sharing with you all the Black Lives Matter call for sustainable transformation in our communities. Okay, enough is enough. Our pain, our cries, and our need to be seen and heard resonate throughout this entire country. We demand acknowledgement and accountability for the devaluation and dehumanization of Black life at the hands of police. We call for radical, sustainable solutions that affirm the prosperity of Black lives. George Floyd's violent death was a breaking point, an all too familiar reminder that for Black people, law enforcement doesn't protect or save our lives. They often threaten and take them. Right now, Minneapolis and cities across our country are on fire, and our people are hurting. The violence against Black bodies felt in this ongoing mass disobedience is all happening while we grapple with a pandemic that is disproportionately affecting and killing us. We call for an end to the systemic racism that allows this culture of corruption to go unchecked and our lives to be taken. We call for a national defunding of police. We demand investment in our communities and the resources to ensure Black people not only survive, but thrive. Currently, we are fighting two deadly viruses. COVID-19 is threatening our health. White supremacy is threatening our existence, and both are killing us every single day. We demand real transformation now, transformation that will hold law enforcement accountable for the violence they inflict, and transformation of this racist system that breeds corruption, and transformation that ensures our people are not left behind. It's time for our cities and states to defund the police and invest in communities. So thank you for listening to the Black Lives Matter message that comes directly from their founding website. You all can access that information there as well. So working with the Black Lives Matter message, I wanted to introduce an action plan. I have been working with an action plan team that consists of local activists and organizers. So we've been working on generating a research-based action plan. And our action plan team has created a mission statement. Our mission statement is to address systemic racism through a community-informed approach. So our overall goal is to create action. So we believe that talk and support is great and needed, but the time for change is long overdue. Public officials hold the power to create change at a systemic level. So we are calling on public officials to act on these plans. And we're asking you all for support from local organizations and community members to urge our public officials to act. So I'm gonna share with you now the action plan that we've generated. And if there's any questions about the action plan, we can go ahead and elaborate on that in more detail if anything needs clarification during the Q&A. So I'm gonna go ahead and start screen sharing our action plan with you guys now. And I'll go ahead and read it as it's screen sharing for anyone who's on their phone as well. So let me go ahead and get that set up for y'all.
Would you mind addressing the issue with how the protests have been going and any harassment you may have received or anything that has been of concern?
Yeah, we have been protesting out there. We had like a week-long protest, and we kept the momentum going. It's still going today. That's why we're still protesting today again from 3 to 6. We have seen support from the community, which is encouraging, but we've also seen a lot of retaliation. You know, people will drive by and rev their engines and try and intimidate us and like blow smoke and exhaust fumes at us from their cars, and shout really derogatory racial slurs at us. I know one demonstrator was holding a sign that said, "I can't breathe," which was Eric Gardner and also George Floyd's last words as the police choked like the air out of him. And a pickup truck was driving by into the demonstrator holding the "I can't breathe" sign. They yelled at him and said, "If you can't breathe, why don't you just take off your mask?" And it was directed at a Black man, and we all know that the Black community is being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So on many levels, it's a deeply disturbing comment. So yeah, there has been support, but there's also been a lot of hate and backlash from that as well.
How did the police respond to that?
The police have been there on and off. They've mainly been there to like make it known that they're there, but I haven't really seen much action, if any action from them addressing the people who are like threatening and intimidating. It hasn't really been addressed by the police.
Can you speak about the truck a bit?
The
one that was parked at Family Video parking lot?
Sorry, I'm not aware of that. I'm only aware of what was going on during the protest. But I can go into our action plan now. So I'm gonna go ahead and start the screen share with you all. So let me go ahead and open that up.
I would just like to say Officer Hamer has been extremely helpful and very attentive to the community. He gave out all of his contact information for anybody to contact, and when I reached out to him with my concern in my neighborhood, he took the time to talk with me and to assure me that I would be safe and that my kids are extremely safe here and that he would help out. So I would like to say thank you because it is appreciated.
All right, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So this was the action plan that our action plan team has generated. And again, our mission statement is to address systemic racism through a community-informed approach. So we have 10 plans that we are calling for public officials to act on. So I'm gonna go ahead and read through those plans for anyone who can't see the screen share and is on the phone. So the first plan, and these aren't listed in any particular order, but the first plan is acknowledge that the prison industrial complex is a modern system of slavery. We are asking to address systemic racism through a community-informed approach. We are calling for an end to the school-to-prison pipeline. We are asking for the reallocation of police funding into community health. We are calling for an end to the cash bail system. We are calling for police departments to pay for misconduct lawsuit settlements. We're asking to break the blue wall of silence, to fire officers for misconduct and excessive use of force, to demilitarize the police, and overall, we are asking to end mass incarceration. So that is our general action plan. And again, during the Q&A, if anyone would like any elaboration on any of those 10 points, please feel free to ask. I do have more information to share about that. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop our screen sharing now. And I am gonna go and finish up with a closing statement about our action plan. All right, so in closing, today is Juneteenth. So sharing this action plan is a way to honor the historical legacy of Juneteenth. Historically, Juneteenth was a time for the Black community to push for radical legislation. Our ancestors had to push for radical legislation for us to achieve the 13th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation. So we must remember that at that time, abolishing slavery was viewed as radical because it challenged the cornerstone of US economics, which is forced labor. We must also acknowledge that there was a loophole intentionally written into the 13th Amendment that enabled for slavery to be reformed into a system of prison labor. This loophole stated, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime, shall exist within the United States." So with that loophole, that gave us the criminalization and mass incarceration of Black people that we can observe in our current US society. So to honor our ancestors on this historical day, we can use our voices to create change and call for freedom. So thank you all for giving me this platform. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take just a quick breath here. We've been talking a lot of trauma, and to be clear, white people are not the recipient of racism. You know, we're not the victims of it. We're the beneficiaries of it, and that is why we're here today. We have a chance to actually save somebody from being disappeared into our system. We do estimate we have taken dozens of complaints over the last year and a half as part of this work. We have managed to submit over a dozen of them to the Illinois State's Attorney and the Illinois Attorney General, who has opened an office now on the east side of Macomb on East Jackson. So now people will not have to work so hard to get to them. They'll be able to just go in the office when they have trouble. They won't have to go directly through our org either. We want all people to be able to access the structures, protections, and functions of government properly, equitably, and in attention with in accordance to their civil and human rights. This next account that I'm going to read is heartbreaking. There's many elements of it that are quite distressing, and the survivor in this story is listening in as we speak. And here we go. So I guess I'll start off with, let's talk about children who witness shootings. This survivor was a witness of a shooting at a very young age and lost a family member to that, and developed post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative identity disorder, anxiety, depression, and struggles with affect regulation issues. And in our community, Black people with PTSD who have difficulty with affect dysregulation are labeled as having anger management. And that language is used against children in our school system here too. And that's very problematic because it's stigmatizing. It implies that it's volitional. It implies that they can control it. And so I'm just going to give you just a 2-minute aside on why this is important to this narrative. When children of trauma do not receive proper care afterwards, then their healing becomes a part of their trauma becomes wrapped up as part of their development the rest of their lives. And they will always carry some markers for trauma. They will have affect dysregulation at times. They will struggle with being able to stay in the moment. They may experience periods of dissociation. And dissociation means that often they can't be self-protective because they get tunnel vision. They can't necessarily react well to what's happening in the environment. They may not perceive harm, and they may freeze and be completely unable in that situation, to respond. And we see this happening to Black people in their responses to police, authoritarian police, who use a non-trauma informed approach. So when you're getting an officer screaming in your face and pointing at you and ordering you, and you already have PTSD and dissociation, you may dissociate and be unable to comply. Now, what we've had happening is we have a lot of officers who take that as disrespect or as resisting arrest because they are frozen and their brains literally have said, you are not safe moving at all. There is no circumstance, there's nothing you can do. Shut down and maybe you'll survive what's to come. And that is a trauma response. And this child grew up and has these conditions and still is managing to move her life forward. But this brings us to some of these issues that she is dealing with today, that we need help to be able to prevent a greater tragedy and injustice from being leveraged against her by our own city leaders. So to begin with, the first issue, she's an adult now, a mom, and she was walking with her baby when a person known to her, who she has had issues between them, they both are trauma survivors, and there is a lot of, we're going to call it a tactic here, and we need all of our community members to begin to, especially white allies who might see this. And you'll see this in some of the murders too, with some of the Black people who have been killed. They end up going in, they start off the incident with the police where they are trying to maintain control of themselves, but their brain stems, because of previous trauma, are larger, and the amygdalas start flooding their system, start sending messages that floods them with stress hormones and adrenaline. And the longer they are in that interaction, and the longer that officer is poking at them, right? Poking at them and telling them, you this, that's going to keep on. And don't think that we don't have abusive officers who know what this is. When officers are using an authoritarian poking and in their face, invalidating language, oh, we know about you, or that causes such a level of overload distress. It is re-traumatizing for them. Often they'll dissociate or they will act out. And at some point, when their system decides that they just can't take anymore, their brainstem will kick in to take some action, whatever that may be. It may be saying a comment, it may be knocking over a bottle of disinfectant, it may be telling someone to F off, but nobody should have to be killed by police because they finally couldn't take it anymore, or be hurt by them. So this survivor was walking with her baby one day in the northwest quadrant of Macomb when that person known to her that they had had previous conflict between them, swerved and attempted to hit them. She called the police, even though she's had nothing but terrible experiences with the police here. But she was that scared that she made a try. She tried. She called the police and she was transferred to a number where nobody answered and there was no opportunity to leave a message. And at this point, we will call out that this is an example of a systemic problem that leverages everything else that comes after it. And this is why, had that call not been flubbed by the Macomb Police Department, and we definitely want to ensure that from now on, they take call logs and they ensure that any victims, crime victims calling for help, aren't sent to an empty phone that never gets answered. That is egregious, it's unacceptable, and it enabled everything else that's I'm about to read to you. She gave up, and who wouldn't? If you've had nothing but bad experiences with the police and you're sent that, I get that, I understand that. Issue 2, a few months later, this survivor was with a friend at a public business here in the community when the person who had swerved and attempted to hit her and her son was at the store working. The manager of the store has an affidavit that confirms the details I'm about to read and is willing to give testimony on her behalf that the words that this person said to this mother were, "I should run you and your son over again." At that point, this trauma survivor who had recently been almost driven over and had received no help from this community, of course, had what we would call a PTSD dysregulation slip. So did she hurt anybody? No. Did she hurt herself? No. She knocked over a bottle of disinfectant, just a few bucks, and something for which the manager said, hey, if somebody said that to me, I would do the same thing. No problem. The manager, the store didn't want to press charges. The woman who had been provocative didn't want to press charges. And yet the officers were called, and there were one officer who responded, ended up being, and I'm sorry, his name is slipping. Let me check with something. Here. Okay, they'll get us that name. This officer began to use a really, not a trauma-informed approach. A trauma-informed approach in this situation, you have two trauma victims, right? And they are struggling with their affect with each other. Normally you approach them calmly. You kind of set them out where they're not seeing each other. You keep your hands close to your body so that you are not provoking them. You are not causing them to feel in fear. You are not triggering them to previous traumas. And then you just give them time. You maybe give them something to drink. You make sure if they haven't eaten, you get them something to eat. You help them feel safe again so that they can regain control. They can shut down the flooding of the adrenaline and regain the ability to use their higher reasoning. Because while you're flooded with PTSD, you cannot access your learning, your higher reasoning skills. You instead convert through a fast pathway that says you're in danger again and you're going to have to respond for your life. And anyone who tries to blame somebody with PTSD for not being able to think in the moment, not being able to respond, does not have enough training to understand this. But one of the officers was fine, was calming and great. The other officer went inside, started poking at the person who had been the one who had made the comment, and that person started getting enraged and started back and forth, and it began to escalate. And I will let you know that we have many complaints and affidavits that show that pattern of escalation by our police when dealing with Black people. So we want to call that out as a tactic explicitly. If you see it as a white ally, please start recording it. It is never appropriate to treat people that way. We don't stick our fingers as public servants. They shouldn't be sticking their fingers in anyone's faces. They shouldn't be making fun of them, calling them names, cursing at them, threatening them with jail. You know, a trauma-informed approach is urgently needed across all of our policing techniques. So, okay, so at that point, that officer comes out and says, well, you know, none of them wanted to press charges, but I have to press charges on you, and you're being charged with battery and you're going to jail. So they took this mom to jail and charged her with battery for knocking over a bottle of disinfectant after the woman who had tried to drive over her and her child threatened to do it again. And I'm willing to bet that if that had happened to a white person, that would not have been the outcome. She bonded out. I'm sorry, I need just a moment here. And I'll state, and at this point, I'm going to unmute Dr. Essie Rutledge because she had helped, taken the initial with this. And Dr. Rutledge, can you talk a little bit about the police report or any questions you had about it?
The report that you just mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the one we're in.
Okay. Well, it's just that I was called upon. I know the person, and therefore I was told what had happened to her, and I was really rather upset that she was arrested and had to pay, to get out of jail when she is a mother, a single mother, trying to take care of her child and herself. And so that concerned me. And because I did know of one group in Macomb that has been involved in these kind of incidents. I wanted to call on someone else also to, so she would be able to relate the story, and so we could see what direction we would take from that. And this is how this happened. And I must say, this is not the only case. I have been called upon a lot of times to assist people, to be an advocate for them when they don't know where to turn, when they are confronted with, being arrested or injustice that becomes difficult for them. So, and now this young woman is out there. She will be going to court, and she has had some other benefits taken from her because she's charged with battery, and I just think that is so unfair.
I completely agree.
That is what I know about that case at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Rutledge, and I'll continue now. Thank you for giving me a few minutes here. At this time, the Democratic Women of McDonough County calls on State's Attorney Matthew Kwakala to dismiss all charges. And I believe, and I'm going to ask Elaine, would that be without prejudice? Would that be what we wanted to ask for on that? Let's see if I can unmute you there. This is Elaine. Oh, you're still muted, Elaine. You may need to unmute yourself from the button there. Why is that?
There we go.
There we go.
All right, now, with prejudice or without prejudice, I think with prejudice means they can't file it again.
Okay. We want to ensure that they can't file again on this.
Ask them though. Be sure. I'm not sure about the terminology, but that should be looked up on Google to be sure. But I think with prejudice means they can't file it again. It could be the opposite. Okay.
All right. We'll make sure that we get that language proper.
I
Thank
just
you.
Googled it, and yes, with prejudice means that it's dismissed permanently.
Right.
Let's do that. Okay. Going into the next part of this. Somehow in the intervening weeks after that incident with the disinfectant, a rumor emerged in our community that the survivor had not knocked over a bottle of disinfectant, but that she had, in effect, actually hit a woman over the head with a bottle of bleach. That is a baseless accusation. It does not match the facts, does not match the witness statements, it does not match the report that was found there. Which brings us to the next issue. So this survivor wanted to move away from that neighborhood and begin to, carve out a little bit of a more peaceful existence, hopefully. And was all set to move into this new residence. And the white male housing manager asked her wholly inappropriate questions about her relationship status and if there was going to be any men around and if she was, dating material. And she indicated no, she just wanted to move in, just needed to have a place to live. He was very helpful by her account and seemed to, want to help grease the paperwork through, to, just help her get in there. And she paid her fees and her housing application was approved with the background check. And she was given the key to move in. On her birthday, she showed up there with her brothers who are Black, and it was suddenly a very different story. Upon arrival, she was beset upon by the property manager. He was extremely agitated and accused this mom of being a liar, stating that she had broken a bottle of bleach over somebody's head and that her voucher was going to be rescinded or had already been rescinded, and he called the police. We do not know what he said to the police to cause them to show up as if something horrible was happening. But in other communities, this kind of use of the police as an enforcement arm has caused Black people to be murdered. So we wish to explicitly state that we believe our state's attorney, Matt Quicala, needs to look at those recordings and needs to look at what was said to find out why the police were sent there in such a large group, just for her brothers helping her move in.
No,
Go ahead.
I have a little knowledge of what supposedly happened.
Good.
They sent the police there, and they had charged her with going in the house before she moved in to going in the house, finding drugs. So they had charged her of having drugs. They smelled drugs. I don't know that they found them, but they smelled the drugs in the apartment that she was moving. And she had not really officially moved in yet.
She just messaged me and she said that he claimed that 5 people were threatening him and that the 5 people included her 2 brothers, her son, and her female friends.
Good.
So then we get to so we get to the point now where how does this rumor, she already had a housing voucher, she had already cleared the background check, and her background does not have the battery charge on it for a bleach bottle, and yet that's what the property manager had claimed and housing had claimed as well. So she was told that she could appeal, but she was not allowed to move in. So she took all of her stuff back home and she's out of the money for the truck or back to where she was. She tried to file the appeal. And then Dr. Rutledge, would you like to talk about the appeal process here? Because you were a part of this.
Well, we don't have an appeal process because the Equal Opportunity Fair Housing Commission is not active. They have another process, so I don't know what they replaced that commission policies with. I know that they are not meeting, so I don't know what their rules are. I understand they have an affirmative action person at City Hall now, and it's just a lot of confusion. But the commission is not the ones to whom one files a complaint anymore, according to my understanding of it.
No, complaints now go through the affirmative action officer, Scott Coker, in City Hall, or for county through housing, right?
Or for what?
If it's, sorry, let me mute the mails here.
Okay, would you repeat that, please?
As long as my dog will stop barking. Joey, get down. Okay. So, yeah, at this point, the appeal process was supposed to go through Annette Ingledew Carper's office. And so she was contacted over a month. She was supposed to call this mom June 1st to set up a meeting for the appeal and never called. And this mom has never received any further contact from that. But initially,
you're talking about the appeal that the housing was to conduct.
That's right. Yes. Sorry.
So yes, and that was supposed to have an appeal process, but it was during the time that the restrictions existed about people, about having meetings in face to face. So because she has a child, and because I was also going to be at this hearing with her, I informed the young woman that she should not agree to going to a hearing that was face to face, because the governor had indicated that shouldn't be going on. So I even talked to Annette, and she was supposed to set up a hearing after she found out more about the lifting of the restrictions. And she was to call the young lady when she finally found when we were to have the hearing. She never was called back. So we don't know what the status of that hearing is.
Thanks, Dr. Rutledge. We do know that somehow, for some reason, somebody ordered or claims to have ordered a second, I'm getting some information from one of our team members. Per our admissions and continuing occupancy policy, once a grievance is requested, the housing authority has 10 days to respond. So Annette Ingledew Harper has not done that. Let's hope that we can have that happen so that we can get her housing voucher properly. We do have questions about this. Did the property manager hope this mom would be an easy target for further sexual harassment, and then upon seeing her brothers realize she had support and realize he wasn't going to get away with it? And then did he contact housing and tell them that false story about the bleach bottle over the head to scuttle her voucher that day? And did he use that as a framework to justify calling the police and claiming that he had 5 people attacking him? Under whose authority was a second background check run, and why, if one was? Because they claimed one was, but we don't yet know. But they also claimed that it showed that she had broken the bleach bottle, which that'd be interesting if that showed up. And why has the executive director taken so long to get back to this mom about her appeal? And why wasn't the letter that she did receive initially, sent certified mail? There's people in the neighborhood. At this time, we call on State's Attorney Matthew Quicala to investigate this call to determine if charges should be filed. No, calls like this where private white individuals misuse the power of the police to enforce personal objectives, such as to hide evidence of sexual harassment, is unacceptable and should be investigated. Cases like this happen far more disproportionately leveraged against Black and other people of color by white people. We also condemn State's Attorney Matthew Quicala's insistence that this mother should be sent to jail during COVID on a battery charge for the disinfectant. That is a waste of taxpayer dollars. It is a re-traumatization. It is a mischaracterization of what happened. It does not go with the evidence. And yet, it looks like that's where this is going to head unless we can marshal the support of this community. So we are announcing a social media campaign that we will be working on this weekend to announce justice for Kiana. And you can watch our Facebook page for that. We do not want this mother sent away simply for having been mistreated and struggling to maintain control and knocking over a bottle of disinfectant. Furthermore, she should not even have a police record on any of this. So at this point, we're going to go to the next, I think, in our, was there anything else on there? I'm just checking with her real quick. Let me know did I cover that? Okay. Next is Emiliano is going to, go ahead.
Oh, hold on a minute.
I'm gonna mute myself while. Okay. Emiliano Vera is going to present our demands.
Hello?
Hello.
All right. Hi. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Yeah.
All right. Great. So we are presenting a list of 10 demands of the city and the police. These are demands that have been compiled over the past year and a half of the work done by the Racial Justice Committee and by the Democratic Women of McDonough County that have, as of yet, not been addressed. So these are a compiled list of demands regarding racial justice and better government and de-escalation of the police and addressing the racist harassment by the police since the organization began a year and a half ago. So the first is in regards to the Equal Opportunity and Fair Housing Committee, which is the body established to address issues of racism, discrimination in housing and employment in the city of Macomb that has been largely stripped of all power and authority, and has recently been even placed restrictions on how much public accountability can go into it, with the restriction of the public comment section being required to be submitted in writing one meeting ahead of time, and there's only 4 meetings a year. So regarding the Equal Opportunity and Fair Housing Committee, we demand to reinstate monthly meetings, to actively solicit input from the community regarding to issues relevant to its mission, enforce attendance requirement of 50% of annual meetings, with appointees failing to meet the attendance goal removed and replaced before the next meeting, ensure that no members are appointed that have conflicts of interest, and rescind the draconian public comment policy implemented last year that restricts public comments to those submitted in writing in the previous meeting. Number 2, given the situation of rent and the fact that the landlords and the police work very closely together to often terrorize tenants and extract rent out of them that right now is not required to be paid and cannot be used as grounds for eviction, for the city to make a public proclamation published in the local newspapers on the city website, reminding all tenants and landlords that per Executive Order 2020-10 by the Governor of Illinois, all state, county, and local law enforcement officers in the state of Illinois are instructed to cease enforcement of orders of eviction for residential premises for the duration of the gubernatorial disaster proclamation. In other words, no evictions can be enforced and no late fees charged for failure to pay rent, which has been a threat levied by landlords against their tenants in Macomb in several apartment complexes. Further instructing that all complaints regarding abuses by landlords be directed to the Equal Opportunity and Fair Housing Commission, and giving the Fair Housing Commission the sufficient resources to act on those complaints. Number 3, encourage all city council members to canvass their wards at least annually so they're regularly, directly informed about the conditions in the city as experienced by those they represent. Number 4, solicit information from the public about other possible experiences, especially regarding discrimination and racism, ensuring a transparent reporting process to help the community members feel safe when making such reports. 5, regarding the police department, annually solicit data about the public perception regarding the culture and functioning of the leadership and members of the Macomb Police Department. Publish an annual report dealing how such information informs police department leadership, hiring, training, advancement, and functioning. Place information on the City and Fire Commission website. Link to a web form for solicitation of the feedback from the community. Number 6, create a joint committee with members of the Police and Fire Commission, the Equal Opportunity and Fair Housing Commission, and representatives of the Black community to identify non-law enforcement duties of the police in order to properly reallocate the resources being used by the police towards other public agencies that have the capacity to competently and non-violently address broader social issues such as mental health care. The police on Wednesday even specifically requested as much in their discussion with the NAACP. So that should be a point of mutual interest where we are moving funds from the police that they are using to be the mental health provider and social service provider of last resort, and ensuring that those resources are being moved to the agencies that are properly equipped to deal with social services and mental health issues, rather than having men with guns and not sufficient training to deal with those issues. Number 7, investigate the causes and effects of disproportionate policing on the Black community by establishing a plan and timeline to explain known disparities occurring in Macomb, including stops, searches, aggressive questioning, and physical violence. Number 8, investigate Officer Ken Nevar due to anonymous reports of threats he has made against Black residents of Macomb, and have him taken off street duty pending the results of an investigation. Number 9, fire Police Officer Linsey May for numerous documented incidents of abuse and harassment, especially against women and Black residents. Number 10, fire Police Chief Curt Barker for numerous reported incidents of abuse against civilians, including those currently under investigation by the Attorney General of Illinois as human rights violations. Most recently, his role in sending away of a Black disabled man on a one-way Amtrak train to Chicago, where he almost died of hypothermia and exposure. And we ask that of Mayor Inman, and we ask that Mayor Inman do his job in investigating these claims as well, or step down if he's unwilling to.
Thank you, Emiliano. At this point, we will open up for questions for anyone who has them. Do we have any hands raised? Okay, there's one right there. Pixel 3XL, 3AXL, go ahead. Give them a second to unmute here. And if anyone else has a question, feel free to raise your hand.
Heather, that's me.
Oh, sorry. Forgot. Anyone else have questions? Okay. Well, we'd like to thank everybody for joining us.
Do.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so in the NAACP meeting, the digital meeting that was on Wednesday as a joint meeting between the NAACP of McDonough County and with the invited guests of the heads of police of WIU, Macomb, the county, and the local state police department. The police representative said that issues of racism and police violence were simply not issues in Macomb, that they were big city issues. And yeah, I would like to ask that we be given the data on that we currently have, and that if we don't have data, then they start collecting data on that, because we know from the data that we do have that Black people are disproportionately stopped, and from our affidavits that they often do not report out of fear when they are harassed by police. So I would like to know the grounds on which the police made that statement.
We also, our government is supposed to be transparent, equitable, accessible, responsive, and it's supposed to be there for everybody. And it shouldn't require somebody to go up and have to speak one-on-one with privileged white people in power if you've already been disempowered and mistreated. Because right away, that sets up an obstacle that white people do not have to deal with. The fact that our city government is almost overwhelmingly white, except for Alderwoman Tammy Lee Brown Edwards, is something that we find very concerning. And our attempts to try to get our city, our mayor and our city council people out into the communities where people could know who they are, and they could actually begin to talk to our citizens of Macomb who are not just their typical circle or people who feel perfectly comfortable going into City Hall, were met with, well, you know, that's too much work, or I don't see myself doing that, or everybody knows us, everybody knows where we are. No, that is not true. People do not know. And if you look at the messaging, there is no anti-racist language being used by our white city government. And this is problematic. Why? Because then we kind of know that they're just not safe. They're not perceived as safe. And why would anyone assume that they're safe? We urgently need to have real discussions about how people access the structures of government, where implicit bias allows people to fall through, where there is perceived abuse of power or disconnect that causes people who have been subjected to a lifetime of racism to think, you know, it's just going to end up like it always does. And we have been working on this issue for over a year and a half, and personally, myself and a lot of our team members, actually, we have been working on it for years together. What changed was we realized that we used to focus on helping one person with one problem. And that solves the problem for that one person. And gee, that's great that we can do that, and that feels good, and, you know, fine. But it doesn't begin to dismantle the broken structures of systemic racism that allows a problematic, abusive white man to sexually target a black mom moving in, and then to decide, oh no, I might get held accountable. Let me call the police and let me lie about her to housing, and then let's get her housing voucher taken away, and let's get her moved out of here, and I'll move on to somebody else, and the police will help me. We white people know we can do that, right? I mean, that's part of our privilege. That structure does not work against us the way it does work against Black and other people of color in our community and in our country. And it is on us white people to begin to see this, to really see this, and to stop each other from using that structure to hurt our Black community members. We must urgently act. We have people in harm's way. Now, as far as Officer Ken Nevar, I'm going to relate something to you, but it's not because I feel victimized. I felt like I could handle that fine, but it does verify a little bit of something. Last summer, when the Democratic women of McDonough County called on our state and our local party to disavow themselves from the racism and the white supremacy at the national and the state level, there was crickets, except that either that night or somewhere around that time, I was here in my house and it was dark. I was laying down, but my dog started freaking out. Somebody was pounding on my wall and on the windows and shining a mag light in, and I could hear clicking on the glass, and my dog's teeth were hitting the glass, and he was lunging at and he never, you know, he barks, but he's not someone who lunges unless he feels like I'm threatened. And I looked and I thought, what the heck is happening? And then I saw Officer Ken Nevar on my stoop. And he had his hand on his gun. It wasn't unholstered, but he was really trying to get my dog to be aggressive. And so I opened up the window knowing that I didn't want to open up the door, or else my dog would probably be hurt, or maybe the officer would be hurt, and I didn't want that. But I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I got a report of what did he call it? I'm I'm sorry, that part's unclear because I kind of blew it off at the time, but he said, we got a report of an aggressive dog or something. I said, he's not aggressive unless you're there provoking him. So no, he's been inside with me. There's been no problem. There's no aggressive dog here. And the man stomped off. At the time, I just thought, oh, well, you know, maybe he's just trying to provoke me a bit or whatever. And I blew it off because as a white person in this community, I knew I was pretty safe from him actually hurting me. Not that he wouldn't necessarily try to take my dog or make life difficult, but I didn't feel like my life was threatened. Can you imagine how our members feel tonight, knowing that this man is out there, and today we have told about the crimes that he has been allegedly perpetrating in the city, including running several Black families out because they were so terrified of the man? So I'm going to make a very pointed comment here to try to protect people in this city tonight, okay? Get Officer Nevar, take his gun, put him on a desk, and investigate this guy. And then we want an assurance that our Black community members are going to be safe from him, that they can sleep well knowing that he's not going to be stalking them, he's not going to be sitting outside their homes, he's not going to be provoking their animals so he can justify taking them away, he's not going to be yelling at them over the fence. When officers have no consequences for such behavior, it doesn't just continue. It corrupts the entire cultural environment of that entire police department, and it turns good officers into bad officers because they can become complicit. We know that we have good officers here, and they deserve good, competent, ethical, anti-racist, pro-affirming, pro-LGBTQ+, trauma-informed leadership. And we urgently need our city leaders to hear us on that. We have been asking for these things for over a year and a half now, only to be met with lots of denials and calls for us to speak positively and to just go in and meet with them. Those are insufficient fixes for structural problems. We need to work at the structure. So at this point, we're going to unmute all and give everybody a chance to discuss or reflect. And let's see where the discussion takes us. So now the floor will be open.
I would like to make a point.
Go ahead, Dr. Rutledge.
And it is in regard to these individual officers. Racism being systemic, institutionalized, we will not get very far just, you know, singling out the bad cops, and they need to be singled. But if we are going to really get at this problem as being systemic, we need to be directing our challenges and efforts to the chief, who is the person that controls to a great extent what goes on. And the reality is police all over the country have had immunity in regard to their criminal behavior, any behavior. And I just think we have not been as forceful as we need to be with regard to the fact that the chief is the supervisor over these policemen. And if they do not feel that when they do things that are anti-racist, that are racist, they do things that are dangerous, and they are not going to be held accountable, they will continue to do it. And don't forget that, you know, the chief indicated his biggest frustration was over not having control. And that is problematic. So we have to expect that the chief is going to get involved and make certain that the things that the police are doing that are in violation of our rights and the rules are brought in check.
Thanks, Dr. Rutledge. Yes, and we would also like to just mention a bit about up on our website, we have affidavits from a teacher, from a trauma therapist who tried to speak to the chief over the past several years. There's been several, and it did not go. Those affidavits are up on our website, and you can see the chief's responses for yourself.
But we have to keep challenging him, because that is no indication that you haven't done right, but we got to really challenge the person who is largely responsible for what goes on in that department, whether it's in conformity with the rules or in violation. If they are not carrying out the policies and practices, and if those policies and practices are not important to the extent that they are going to help to eliminate some of the racism, they are going to continue to do what they've been doing forever.
We also share, and our entire team agreed on this, we have real concerns that if things do not change now, significantly, transparently, then when we bring students back here, we wonder what kind of lives they're going to have. We have taken affidavits of WIU students who have been so maltreated by our police and been given, they came here and left here with a police record they shouldn't have had. And we will be launching a Project Innocence effort here in McDonough County. We estimate that there may be dozens of Black community members and former students of WIU who have police records they shouldn't have, and those cases need to be reviewed. We also have evidence that we have others who have been retaliated on by the police, and then charges against them were escalated so that they can, so that they could be discouraged from filing complaints. And we also have, as far as the dog situation and Ken Nevar, several community members, several Black families related that when they wanted to make a complaint, when they were going to make a complaint, the police chief showed up at their door and threatened them. So these types of problems are known here. They are pervasive, they are systemic, they are intractable, they are difficult to go around. We have a pretty sharp team of really, really well-educated people who have good access to technology, and we struggle to figure out the pieces of how our community members are supposed to be able to transparently access government. The city's website is really insufficient. It is just not much of a resource at all, and telling people to go to it when they have all these other blocks between them and accessing what should be the proper functioning of government services, protections, opportunities, and oversight and accountability. What are they to do? What else can they do? So this is why we formed, we decided that we would start working on this as a team and start really trying to fix things, because when these structures work only for people with our white privilege, it decreases the quality of life and the health of our community. It negatively impacts people's morale. It has caused us to lose dozens of Black families out of this community who wanted to stay here and study here or set up a business here. And so by us talking about these things, it's painful. Nobody likes to air this stuff out where things are. I mean, we don't enjoy that, but these things are really happening. And until white allies began stepping up, they remained hidden. And even when we as white allies who are tech competent went to our city council and followed their rules, they leveraged their power against us to silence our voices on that. So we also want an immediate assurance today that those officers are going to, the ones that we've mentioned already and the ones that we previously called for their removal or their investigation, we want to know what's going to be done about them, because if they are allowed to retaliate on any of our members, any of the people giving us affidavits, any of the complainants, then we will have yet another meeting, and we're going to make sure that everybody knows. I will state that I would like to thank all of our survivors who are here tonight, and thank you for the honor of being your voice. We are deeply, profoundly sorry for all you have endured in our community, especially without our witness and aid. We hope in some way that today's efforts and our ongoing efforts forward may begin to help you see that there are people who are trying to listen. We don't always get it right. I'm definitely not a perfect ally. But we'll do our best, and we would like to offer assistance to anyone who would like to reach out to us. If you need an ally, a white ally, to go speak to somebody anywhere in McDonough County, we have safe, anti-racist white allies who are trauma-informed to go with you, to support you, and then we can help, hopefully, at least until we can fix the non-functional parts of our government. With any luck, we can at least make sure that when people do butt up against these problematic things that are not fixable in today, and maybe not for quite a while, we could at least make it visually apparent, and then everybody can do what they want to do. So would anybody like to ask any questions?
I give you credit for having really made efforts to do things and to act and not just talk. But, and let me say, you said students, and these are things that people who are victims are, understand very quickly. You said the students, but it's important for you to say black students and students of color, because the white students are not having any problem coming to us, not because of any racism. And I dealt with white students for 30 years on that campus. And that's why I said in the very beginning, I could see some hope, because these young people, and you got young people, old people, all kind of people. And I think that they are really serious about it. And we have to support them, and we have to get as much input as we can in regard to the racism that the students are experiencing. And it seems that they got allies. I have never been without, people that I know and have been involved with in terms of different organizations that just have not been in organizations that have really been involved to any extent with regard to anti-racism. And those who have, even if it was just in that they are communicating with me, I know that there are those people that are making effort. We don't expect you to be perfect. No, none of us is. But we expect that if we're going to continue down this road, we need to really be working on this systemic racism, which is evident at every institution in Macomb, just as in these United States. And I think that's what Black people and people of color are wanting. And I can say this from the standpoint of the evidence from research. As a sociologist with, one of my areas being that which deals with social justice, social equality, and opportunities, I know that there are people who are trying to do things, but we got to take it beyond just talking about it. And maybe we can, sit down at the table and get more people involved who are the victims of this racism. They might be able to help us in terms of indicating things that we might do that might help to, to eliminate some of the racist experiences that people are having in the community.
So for those who were listening to us today, if you find that you are having symptoms of vicarious traumatization, which that can be difficulty concentrating, stomach upset, headache, fluttering, high anxiety, excessive sweating, then we will urge you to take good self-care, which means attend to your hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Make sure that you get food, that you talk to somebody about your feelings, a safe person, and that you receive assistance for that.
But let me say this. This is very important. I am not traumatized. I get angry sometimes, but I am able to express my concern. And I've been in this battle with social justice, racial justice a long time. And I have even, I feel, been helpful to some people in being advocates for them, helping them to go through a process that might result in some remedies for things that they are experiencing. And much of this, is what their children are experiencing, and they need somebody to go to the schools with them and be there to let the administrators and teachers know what the things that they are doing. But because since 1865, when the Texans finally found that the proclamation had been signed, it wasn't for everybody anyway. It was for those who were involved in this Civil War and had gotten, had been given the right to freedom. And so in order for the Texans to know about this, it would have interrupted their jobs, which had to do with agriculture, having to do with the working on the plantation. So given that, ever since slavery was over, even with the passage of the 13th Amendment, we still were not treated equally because we went from slavery to Jim Crowism. And those people who were not included in Jim Crowism because they were not in those states, they still discriminated against us. They really did. And so I think what you're doing is a good indication that some things can be done if we get people who are committed to being allies and leaders. Racism is white racism. And so when white people come in and and become your allies. We work together because white people have the authority, the privilege. We can't eliminate racism alone. And I do feel that in this community, there are a few people. And as I have said many times, I really, though, believe that the damn women, the work they have done has been more significant than any group that I've seen having been here since 1976.
Thank you, Dr. Rutledge. Thank you on behalf of our org, and it's been an honor to work with you.
Dr. Abraham is an individual that I respect because he too is wanting to do what is right. He wants to be a part of an inclusive community. And he has not hesitated to stand and say it. And so that is another example. And I think if we continue to work together, those of us who really believe and know that we have not achieved equality in this society, nor in Macomb, but I think that maybe some progress can be made. I have a gleam of hope, but I'm not overly optimistic. So, and I really want to thank you, Heather, because you, I believe, are very serious about this. And you've been able to bring on board people who seemingly have the same views you have. And you've been able to motivate them. You've been able to provide leadership. And therefore, I want to give this group credit for having done that. That's why when the last award was given to the coalition, it was to your group because of the work that you've been doing. So I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rutledge. That concludes this press conference. It will be posted on our website and will also be posted to our Facebook page for our Racial Justice Coalition. I'd like to thank all of our members, especially our leaders of our Racial Justice Coalition team, and for his technical assistance and for running this, Merrill Cole, and our allies, Emiliano Vera. Thank you very much for being here with us, and let's work on this stuff together and make our city a wonderful place for all to live, work, play, and study.